The story begins with a hand brushing through a field of wheat. Not a king's hand. Not a general's hand, not yet, not in this moment. Just a man's hand, tired, calloused, reaching out to touch something soft after years of touching nothing but steel, blood, and the cold hilt of a sword. That man's name is Maximus. And in less than an hour of screen time, the world is going to take everything from him, his rank, his family, his home, his name, and in exchange, it will hand him something no empire could ever manufacture: legend. This is the story of a general who becomes a slave. A slave who becomes a gladiator. And a gladiator who becomes the single greatest threat an empire has ever faced, armed with nothing but a wooden sword, a dead man's memory, and a promise he intends to keep, even from beyond the grave. Stick around, because by the end of this recap, you're going to understand why, more than 2 decades later, people still stand up in movie theaters and quote a man who technically dies halfway through the story he's telling. Let's begin. Germania, 180 AD. The edge of the known world. Cold, muddy, and soaked in the blood of a war that has dragged on for years. Here, at the northern frontier of the Roman Empire, we meet General Maximus Decimus Meridius, a soldier's soldier, a man who has spent so long fighting for Rome that he's forgotten what it feels like to simply live for himself. He doesn't dream of power. He dreams of home, a modest farmhouse in Spain, a wife with warm hands, a son who's probably grown 2 inches since he last saw him. That's the detail worth sitting with before anything else happens to this man. Everything that follows is set into motion not by a man chasing glory, but by a man trying to go home. Watching him from a distance is Emperor Marcus Aurelius, old, weary, aware that his own time is running out faster than his empire realizes. And this is where the film plants its first quiet, devastating seed. Marcus Aurelius doesn't want his empire to go to his biological son. He wants it to go to Maximus. Think about the weight of that decision for a second. Rome, for its entire imperial history, has passed power down through bloodlines, sons inheriting thrones simply because of who their father was, not because they earned the right to hold that much power. Marcus Aurelius is proposing something almost unthinkable, giving the empire back to the Senate, to the people, through a man he trusts, not a man he birthed. It's a beautiful idea. It's also, as we're about to learn, a death sentence. Because there's someone else in the tent that day. Commodus. The emperor's actual son. A man who has spent his entire life waiting for a crown that was, by every tradition he understands, supposed to be his. And when his own father tells him, gently, but honestly, that he will never sit on the throne, something breaks in Commodus that was probably already cracked long before this moment. This isn't a villain born from nothing. This is a son who has spent a lifetime seeking approval from a father who respects a soldier more than he respects his own blood. That rejection is the engine of everything Commodus does for the rest of this story. He kills his father. Quietly. With an embrace, of all things, the last image Marcus Aurelius has of his son is being held by him. It's intimate. It's horrifying. And it tells you everything about who Commodus actually is, a man desperate to be loved, who has decided that if love won't be given to him, power will have to be enough. Commodus declares himself emperor before the body is even cold, and the first thing he needs from Maximus is simple: kneel, pledge loyalty, become the sort of a man Maximus knows, deep in his gut, murdered his own father. Maximus refuses. And in the world of Gladiator, refusing an emperor doesn't get you exiled. It gets you erased. Commodus orders Maximus's execution, and, in a decision that reveals just how insecure and thorough his cruelty really is, he orders the deaths of Maximus's wife and son as well. Not because they're threats. Because Commodus understands something ugly and true: the fastest way to break a man who doesn't fear death is to take away every reason he had for wanting to live. Maximus escapes his own execution, barely, bloodied, half-dead, and rides for days, half-conscious, chasing the only thing that still matters to him: getting home before it's too late. He doesn't make it in time. He finds his farmhouse burned. His wife and son already executed, their bodies left hanging, a message from an emperor who wanted Maximus to understand exactly what refusing him costs. There's a moment here worth sitting with. Maximus doesn't scream. He doesn't collapse in some big dramatic breakdown. He just digs. Silently. He buries his family with his own hands, in soil he was supposed to farm in peace one day. And in that silence is something more devastating than any scream could ever be. This is a man whose reason for living has just been buried along with his family. He collapses at their graves, and it's here, half dead from blood loss and grief, that slave traders find him. The general who was offered an empire is now sold as property. Enter Proximo, a former gladiator himself, now a slave trader who trains men to kill for entertainment in the arenas of the Roman provinces. He's cynical, sharp-tongued, and views Maximus's broken, half-alive body the way any businessman views a product, as an investment. But there's more to Proximo than profit. He was a gladiator once. He earned his freedom in the arena, a wooden sword given to him by an emperor who is, in a twist the film saves for later, none other than Marcus Aurelius himself. Proximo isn't just training Maximus to survive. Whether he admits it or not, he sees something of his own past staring back at him. Maximus, at first, wants nothing. Not freedom, not glory, not even survival. A man who has already lost his family has very little fear left to exploit, which, ironically, makes him one of the most dangerous fighters Proximo has ever trained. A man who doesn't fear death fights differently than a man who does. This is where the story earns its reputation as one of the most electric arena sequences ever put to film. Maximus, fighting under a hidden identity, begins working his way through provincial arenas with brutal, controlled efficiency, turning what's supposed to be chaotic slaughter for entertainment into something closer to tactical warfare. He doesn't just kill opponents. He organizes the other slaves around him, turns disorganized brawls into disciplined formations, and starts winning fights nobody expected him to survive. The crowd doesn't know his name yet. But they know his presence. And that presence eventually earns him and his fellow gladiators an invitation no one in the provinces ever expects, a summons to Rome. Commodus, desperate to win the love of the Roman people the way his father effortlessly did, has announced 150 days of games in the Colosseum, a spectacle designed to buy the affection of a public that never asked to be ruled by him. And Maximus, the man Commodus believes he already killed, is about to walk into the Colosseum, in front of the entire city of Rome, in front of the emperor himself. The Colosseum sequence is where this story stops being about survival and starts being about reckoning. Maximus and his fellow gladiators are thrown into a recreation of a historical battle, expected to play the doomed side and die for entertainment. Instead, Maximus does what he's always done best, he leads. He organizes the doomed gladiators into a unit, uses the terrain and the chariots meant to slaughter them as tools of survival, and turns an execution into an upset victory that leaves the entire Colosseum stunned. Commodus descends to congratulate the mystery fighter who just ruined his scripted spectacle. And Maximus removes his helmet. There's no music sting needed here, no visual effect, just a man's face, a General Commodus was certain he'd already erased, standing there very much alive, staring directly at the man who murdered his father and his family. He introduces himself not with fear, but with cold, deliberate control, naming who he was, who he served, and quietly promising that his vengeance will come, in this life or the next. It's less a threat than a vow. And the crowd, unaware of any of this history, does something Commodus never expected, they start chanting for the stranger's life to be spared. Commodus cannot kill Maximus in front of the very public he's trying to win over. Killing him now would be a political disaster. So instead, Commodus is forced into something far more dangerous than execution. He has to let Maximus live, and figure out how to destroy him without turning the crowd against himself. This is the genius of the story's structure. Maximus doesn't win his freedom through strength alone. He wins it by becoming popular, by becoming a symbol the crowd projects their own hopes onto. The more the people cheer for him, the more power he has over an emperor who, ironically, has an entire army but can't touch the one man who publicly humiliated him, because the people won't allow it. Meanwhile, Lucilla, Commodus's sister, and a woman who once loved Maximus before duty and marriage pulled them apart, finds herself trapped in an impossible position. She's grieving her father's death. She suspects, correctly, that her brother killed him. And she's now watching the only man she ever truly respected fight for his life in an arena her brother controls. Lucilla becomes the film's quiet tragedy, a woman with real political intelligence and real courage, forced to survive inside a court where her own brother watches her every move, using her son as leverage to keep her obedient. She begins secretly working with Senator Gracchus and, eventually, with Maximus himself, to plan an uprising, to free Maximus, reunite him with his old army, and restore power to the Senate the way Marcus Aurelius always intended. But Commodus is not a fool. Paranoid, insecure, and obsessively attentive to threats against his power, he uncovers the plot before it can fully form. Proximo, the former gladiator, the man who trained Maximus, the man with his own quiet debt to Marcus Aurelius's memory, sacrifices himself and his fellow gladiators to buy Maximus time to escape. He dies giving Maximus a chance most men in his position wouldn't have bothered giving anyone. Maximus almost makes it out. Almost reaches his old legion, waiting just outside Rome to rise up in his name. But Commodus's men intercept him first, and in a brutal, desperate fight in the shadows of the city, Maximus is captured and stabbed, deep and precise, by Commodus himself, who makes absolutely sure the wound is fatal before having it hidden beneath armor. Here's the detail that turns the final act into something almost unbearable. Commodus doesn't just want to defeat Maximus. He needs to beat him publicly, in the arena, in front of Rome, but he's not willing to risk actually fighting a fair fight. So he ensures Maximus is already dying before their duel even begins. This is who Commodus is, stripped down to his core. Even at the very end, he can't risk earning a real victory. He has to guarantee it, because deep down, in the one part of himself he'll never admit to, he knows he was never his father's equal, and he was never going to be Maximus's either. The final battle in the Colosseum isn't just a fight. It's the entire story distilled into a single confrontation, an emperor desperate for legitimacy against a general who never wanted power in the first place, only justice. Maximus, bleeding internally from the wound Commodus already gave him, fights anyway. He fights past the point his body should even be capable of standing. Because this isn't about winning anymore in the way sports are won. This is about finishing what he swore at his family's grave and giving Rome one last chance to remember what it was supposed to be. The fight is brutal, desperate, uneven. Commodus, even with his hidden wound advantage, is still no match for Maximus's discipline and rage. And when Maximus finally disarms and kills him in front of the entire Colosseum, there's no triumphant roar of victory. There's just silence, and a dying man doing one last piece of duty. With his final breaths, Maximus doesn't ask for glory. He doesn't ask to be remembered as emperor. He asks for the one thing Marcus Aurelius originally wanted, for Rome's power to be returned to the Senate, for the corrupt to be punished, and for his fellow soldiers, the ones who stood loyal beside him even as slaves, to be freed. And then, in the film's final and most quietly devastating image, Maximus finally gets to go home. Not to Spain. Not in the way he originally hoped. But in a hazy, golden vision of the afterlife, where his wife and son are waiting for him in that same field of wheat we saw at the very beginning of the story. The story that began with a hand brushing through wheat ends the exact same way. Except now, it's not a memory of home. It's home itself. Lucilla and the loyal soldiers carry Maximus's body from the arena, ensuring he's honored not as a slave or an entertainer, but as the general and the man of honor he always was, even when Rome refused to see it. What makes Gladiator endure isn't really the swordplay, as incredible as it is. It's the emotional architecture underneath it. This is a story about a man who is stripped of every external marker of identity, his rank, his family, his freedom, even his name in the arena, and yet becomes more himself with every single thing that's taken away. Rome tries to erase Maximus, and instead accidentally creates a legend. And Commodus is the perfect mirror to that idea. He has every external marker of power, the throne, the armies, the crown, and it means nothing, because the one thing he actually wants, respect earned rather than seized, is the one thing he can never buy, steal, or murder his way into. That's really the whole film in one sentence. Power without honor is hollow, and honor without power can still shake an empire to its foundation. And that's the story of Gladiator, a general who lost everything, and in losing it, became something Rome could never fully control. So here's what I want to know from you down in the comments. Do you think Maximus's revenge was really about justice for his family, or was some part of it about restoring the Rome that Marcus Aurelius dreamed of? Let me know what you think, because I genuinely want to read your take on this one. If you enjoyed this recap, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because there are a lot more of these breakdowns coming, and you do not want to miss the next one. Until then, I'll see you in the arena.